Welcome back to the Freemouse MC YouTube channel, and we're here today with a bike that I'm really curious about what it's going to turn out to be. And that is the Kawasaki KLE500 SE. We're standing here with it in the desert of Spain, the beautiful mountains behind me. We're in the middle of nowhere. Actually, the third Indiana Jones movie was filmed here, and I've been riding now through this desert. Maybe you can see I look completely sweat through, and yeah. So I'm now going to tell you what my opinion on the new Kawasaki KLE is. We started out early in the morning with the Kawasaki KLE, and I was a bit unsure what to think. This was definitely not the next Tenere. However, it was also not your typical small adventure bike. With its low center of gravity because of the parallel twin, the KLE500 was just falling into the turns, which took some getting used to. However, the bike handles on road really good, and this is where the strong suit is of this motorcycle compared to its competitors. Also, the bike has a feeling of a big motorcycle to it, and it doesn't feel like you're sitting on a small toy. First of all, how is it to sit on the motorcycle? I'm going to swing my leg over it because that's always the most important thing. I'm coming in at 1.95 m and the bike has a seat height of 870 millimeters. There are 4 different seat options in different heights, and there's a lot of adjustability also then for the aftermarket because the engine and the airbox are really short and really in the front, so there's a lot of things that can be changed here. However, it's pretty alright. I can flat foot the bike perfectly, obviously, but also someone who's like smaller than me definitely could, and the knee angle is pretty comfortable, and the bike is nice to stand up on and sit down back on. There's nothing where your clothes could get trapped on, and the bike is also really comfortable when riding it standing up. For me, the handlebars would need to be a bit higher, but for everyone else, it's going to be perfectly fine. Time to leave the pavement and have some fun with the fact that the KLE500 doesn't come with traction control. Desert. What a beautiful landscape, and this is where the Kawasaki KLE500 shines. It can explore on-road and off-road definitely in comfort and well enough. A plus here is the bike is basically idiot-proof, which is really good for beginners because even if you do something a little bit wrong and the bike gets out of control, you can catch it and it doesn't scare you too much. And for anything that someone who's new into motorcycle riding wants to do on a gravel road, this is fine. We now rode the first bit here with the Kawasaki KLE. You can see this beautiful landscape behind me of the Spanish desert with all the little waves of the mountains. And I've been riding the bike through here, and earlier we rode it on road, and it's very noticeable that the bike has a very light flywheel, and the character from the old Kawasaki KLE with the GPZ500 engine, where like the bike would rev up relatively quick and you basically needed the revs to get the bike going, is also present here, and I kind of like that feeling is back. We now also rode it over gravel road, and there were some discussions earlier with like the ground clearance and everything, but like this motorcycle is mostly catered towards beginner riders who buy their first adventure bike, and then towards Europe. And for that, it does it really well, because now thinking about the roads that we have here, the mixture of gravel and then nice curvy roads, it felt pretty well made for that up until now. I'm curious how it's going to perform the rest of the off-road section, because I think it's now going to get rougher. You get an engine with 452 cc producing 45 horsepower at 9,000 RPM and 32 Nm of torque at 6,000 RPM. That sounds like a quite rev-happy engine. There's one big question that's on my mind with the Kawasaki KLE500, and that is a little bit why. Because if you look at the old Kawasaki KLE, I'm a fan, it's a great bike. However, if you look at the motorcycle from a new perspective, as in buying a bike new. The Kawasaki KLE500 wasn't that great. It wasn't that great off-road, it wasn't that great on road. The range was kind of ugh. I thought about buying one once, and I needed to commute all the way from Hanover to Magdeburg to go to Union during COVID. Couldn't move, and the bike couldn't do those 150 kilometers in one go reliably. So I skipped on it. And then I was like, okay, they're now doing a new one. What is the new one going to be about? Because the old one was one thing. It was fun. It was really, really fun because it had the Kawasaki GP-Z500 engine, and that one revved up quick. It was supposed to be more in a sporty chassis, and then even though both couldn't handle off-road or road that well, it was just plain fun. Off-road, you could slide the thing around really easily, and you just had a good time. You were always smiling on a KLE. And then I was like thinking, if you now bring this into the new package, what is the new KLE going to bring? Because the old one was cool because it was on the used market and was 1,500 euros or something.
Also, the new Kawasaki KLE500 comes with a few flaws. You heard right, that was the bash plate of the bike hitting the floor. There being more suspension travel than ground clearance is obviously an issue, but how often does that realistically happen? During 2 days of testing, this happened twice. However, there's more.
The rear wheel. The rear wheel performs well with the stock tire. Everything is fine. No worries. However, the size of the wheel is 140/70/17. Good luck finding more knobby tires with that, because this is a 70% road bike, 30% off-road. However, you're not going to buy a different bike because you're going to do an off-road heavier tour, so you will need some more knobbier tires, and that's not an option at the moment. However, with this bike coming out and some other adventure bikes starting to have that size as well, we will potentially see more tires for that being developed. Another slight negative that I don't care about that much, but other people will, is the sound of the bike. The sound of the bike is quite quiet, and it also doesn't make a difference if you get the Prokovic exhaust. However, the sound itself is unique. You have a really light flywheel in the engine revs up really quick, and it almost sounds like the bike is sucking in air. That's quite a unique sound, really like it. However, it doesn't have that much volume to it.
So like the old KLE, the new one has its flaws. However, it's also a really fun bike. They managed to capture that energy of the original and really bring it into the new one as well. And it's just so much fun to swing this bike through the turns, and it almost feels a little bit like a supermoto. And especially with the smooth asphalt that we mostly find across Europe and that front suspension, it's just a joy to ride.
So as you now had a bit of an overview how it is to actually experience the Kawasaki KLE. The suspension of the bike comes in at the front with 210 millimeters of suspension travel. That works really well. The suspension does a good job, especially on road. It almost feels like a naked bike there. And off-road, it does it well enough. The bike is basically 70% a road bike, 30% an off-road bike. However, if you look at it from the mind of someone who's just getting into motorcycle riding, that's perfectly fine, because the suspension is going to bottom out if you hit some harder obstacles. It's going to bottom out if you jump the bike. It's also going to, you hit the floor, most definitely if you do that. However, for exploring and getting out there, hitting some trails and not trying to set record speeds, this is perfectly adequate and also quite a lot of fun. The rear suspension is adjustable in preload, which is really good because like a bunch of different riders from different weights from different countries all over Europe are going to be sitting on this thing. The weight of the motorcycle is also pretty alright, coming in at 194 kilos, which is not necessarily light, but also not on the heavy side. And it's lighter than some other models, and with the center of gravity being pretty low, it's manageable, and also the riding experience, if you're on the bike, is pretty forgiving. I'm now not the most experienced off-roader, like I don't go regularly on an MX track or anything, but I did my fair share bit crossing the Himalayas, Iceland, Sahara, those things, and for that, it's perfectly adequate. Like you can do these things, and you can do these things as someone who's starting out, and the motorcycle is pretty forgiving, as in if you open up the throttle mid-turn off-road, it's going to scare you, but most likely you're not going to crash. And the bike doesn't come with traction control, but it basically has built-in traction control, because with 45 horsepower it's going to be tough to, without wanting to break loose the rear end. However, if you want to spin the bike around and do like a U-turn, you can definitely open up the throttle and get the rear wheel spinning. The bike comes with ABS, one thing I really like, because if you learn to ride a motorcycle and are kind of new to this, it's important that you can rely on the rules always being the same, and that is that the ABS is completely off switchable. And I mean completely. Front, rear, and off means off. A lot of motorcycles have this, yeah, the ABS is off switchable, and then you switch it off and you drive down some hill and then you realize, wait, there's a bit of give there. And that really ruins the confidence, because you can't not 100% rely on what the bike is going to do. Of course, this is more dangerous. Of course, the chance of crashing as a beginner off-road with completely no ABS is higher. But you learn to trust yourself. And I think if you start out and you get your first bike, that's really nice. That's how I learned to ride a motorcycle, and I'm really happy with that. So that is possible with the Kawasaki KLE. It's really nice. One thing that I don't like that much about that is you can't switch the ABS on unless you stop. I know there are rules in Europe of like, yeah, you have to stop the bike to switch it off, but to switch it on, because like it's easy to ride back on road and want the ABS again. I don't know if that couldn't have been solved in a different way. All in all, I think this is a good bike, especially at this price point. And a few years back, I wouldn't have thought of an adventure bike as a first-time motorcycle purchase for someone. But with new riders getting older and older because of license costs and all that, for someone in their late 20s, early 30s, getting an adventure bike as their first bike makes sense. And this can be a really interesting option for that. And I think it's really cool that this bike is also a motorcycle that is desirable for the years to come. Like, I'm curious how this bike is going to be seen in 2040, 2045. It is relatively cheap. It comes in at, the base model comes in at 6,495 and the SE at 7,295. That's relatively approachable, and definitely leave your opinion of what you think of the Kawasaki KLE and where you think this is going to end up in the market, and did you ride the old one, in the comments, and see you guys in the next video.